and welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Ashley Hall. On this week's episode of Common Ground, join us as we begin a two-part series on Charles Kapsner of Little Falls, as he paints an extensive project that will honor men and women of our armed services, with murals depicting each branch of the military.
In my studio is a 32 by 40 inch drawing that is sort of acting as my very detailed main study for this piece. From that very detailed drawing, we then take a shot of each quadrant digitally, and then we bring the chip out here, out of the camera, put it in the projector, and then we project that quadrant so we can come in and match all the grids from the photos. So we're like working within the same scale, so it allows me to very quickly get my small drawing up onto this stage. This is the original 16 by 20 inch compositional sketch, so you can see how things have changed, from here to here, these figures. Well, then like right here, you can see when it is blown up, the image, what it looks like on the canvas. We kind of turn the lights off, but that's the very front part of the drawing from the studio. And as you see, I just take the charcoal and line in, and then this is just the very beginning parts of the painting itself. Then from there, I go in and I start to clean up the lines. And then after that, I take a little bit of turpentine and raw sienna, which is this color right here, and I very thinly draw over each of those lines. I allow that to dry overnight. And then from there, we'll start, blocking in like you see at this stage right here. This part of the painting is referred to as a chiaroscuro underpainting, which means light and dark. It's an old Italian term. What it's allowing me to do is get my forms, volumes, atmospheric conditions, and light source in place prior to I commit to full colors. My painting style is indirect, which means that colors are being laid upon one another, but yet the residual of those underlying colors also are there to enhance what's going to be seen on the surface, versus direct oil where I'd be going for the exact color right away, meaning that all of the native colors to these different objects would be already on here, in their light source, light, medium, or mid-tone, dark tone. So that's kind of, where this stage of the painting is at. And then of course the next thing after this will be full color. So right now let me just grab my charcoal, kind of copying in very simply these lines. This is really the most tedious part of the painting from the standpoint of wanting to get everything drawn in as accurately as possible. So once I am committed to actual painting with my full palette of color, I'm not worried about resolving drawing issues. When I was first approached about doing this project, Gordon Gerling had approached me about it. His whole vision was to maybe have a large orchestra shell built out here and then have me do a fresco, which is painting with water-based pigment into fresh laid plaster. Well, that approach would not work in Minnesota because of our climate. So we decided oil painting was the route to go, and then had to get it cleared with the Department of Veterans Affairs down in the cities that it would be actually feasible and possible to do something like this. But then it was also the charge of this small organization to find the money for it. Well, once they got that organized, I then went to work in the fall of '09, September of '09, to do the research on the 5 branches of the military. So I went out and bought myself a very new library on military-related history, art, whatnot. Gordon, who is the gentleman whose idea it was to do this and get permission to commission this huge project, gave me this list of about 40 to 45 different storylines from American history he'd like to see. And so as a tribute and thank you to Gordon, it's like, here's a chance in an allegorical piece that you can see a 20th century person talking to someone from the 18th century. So it's kind of a little, play on, artistic license, so to speak, from that standpoint. And then, of course, another big issue that we deal with today, and they wanted to be brought into it, was the homeless veteran down here in the corner. And you can see just in that sort of downtrodden, sort of beat up kind of feel of, has he turned his back on us? Are we turning our back on these people? This is a big problem in our society today, and we're wanting to address it here, because not everything is pretty about what the end result of one's duty to their country has been. I mean, it's a matter that sometimes we're clearly failing these people, and we need to, get on top of that situation. In addition to the story of the military, but how do you pay homage to each sort of period? So here you can see in the foreground, just as an example, we have a World War II figure. Well, you can see this is sort of symbolic of the landing at Normandy on June 6, 44. Right over here you see a pair of combat boots with a sculling on top, and then there'll be a map of the Philippines coming down through here, much like you can see here. We have North Africa and the boot of Italy. That'll be the Death March of Bataan. This is the 34th Infantry Division, the North Africa Italian campaign. So we have the Red Bull Division right there, and they got stuck in Monte Cassino. We have the Abbey of Monte Cassino up top. So those are just some of the tidbits historically that will go into this. The purpose of this is not only just to paint this to honor the men and women of the military and their contributions, but to encourage education and to have people look back into their own history, to talk about why we're here, how we're here, and things like that. So there's a lot of very valuable things that will be placed in all of them. And again, it's using art as an educational tool in addition to historic representation of many periods of American history. I wanted all the poses and all the uniforms to be things that I would have a chance and opportunity to see from life. And that's when the real work began, because we've got 22 figures in the composition. I was able to go down to Fort Snelling. That's where the cannon team was done, where these two guys were done, and where this is a Civil War militia figure. We wanted to show some of that stuff historically, and then again talking about the men and women of the military. So there are 5 women in this composition, starting back there with Molly Pitcher, who was the first woman ever compensated for her military service in the Revolutionary War there. So then we moved to Civil War, and Dorothea Dix came into play at that point. That's where the sort of whole nursing organization for the military kind of came into being. But I figured, well, we don't want to just have women as nurses throughout the depiction of this composition here. So we have also some famous female spies in the Civil War. So here we have a female spy. And then over here we have World War I, World War II nurse, and then down here we have a young soldier, female soldier, who was mourning over the loss of one of our fallen heroes coming back in one of these containers. It was a lot of fun going back to the 19th and late 18th century, because I guess it reminded me a lot of my education. I worked in Florence, Italy from 1973 to 1981, and from 74 to 81 I was a student of Madame Norina Simi, and she was very much old world, Europe, like late 1800s, early 1900s, just the stories, just the way we talked about things and things were depicted. I think because of that, I had a chance to sort of feel what it must have been like, and especially the day that we were doing these 2 figures down at Fort Snelling last fall. It was in October, and there were people coming through the fort looking at things, and we had set up a studio in one of the barrack rooms, and so people were sort of peeking in, and it was really neat because I really felt part of living history that day, where all of a sudden I'm back with these guys in the 1820s, and just for an afternoon of, such and such a soldier has the time off, and there happens to be an artist traveling through, so I need to do some drawing, and let's pose, and so it gave me a chance to get a real nice sense and feel. And these guys being reenactors and their understanding of history, their detail in the uniforms, they're great people to be around, just to give you that information. You feel their excitement, so it brings you to that period. For me, this project is kind of allowing me to hone in on all the different things I've been trained to do, or what I've worked on, these large-scale fresco projects down south with Ben Long, or the ones I've done here myself, and it's just giving me this whole diversity that it's rare to find. We've really hit on something that we're all touched by, no matter what. It's father, grandfather, brother, sister, cousin, friend, you name it. Everyone somehow is touched by what this project is all about. And certainly all being Americans, and the fact that we're dealing with our freedom and democracy. Because I in my realm of work, in addition to obviously the portraits and all that, I do still life, and I'll do like florals, the vanitas, the ballet, and not everyone's going to like all of that kind of work, but there's something for everybody in this project. As I mentioned earlier, we refer to this as the chiaroscuro underpainting, so I'm looking for my dark darks right now. I mean, we won't be going super dark, but that's what's happening to begin with here. So as you can see, that little simple line sketch is starting to turn into something volumetric by the mere fact that we now begin to paint how light affects these objects. And so in essence, whenever we look at anything or view it, depict it, take pictures of it, we're actually taking a picture of light. A picture of light. So the whole idea is to let you sense that the sun is up over there and it's casting its shadows on these particular areas and hitting the light in other areas. You know, all these objects and whatnot are being drawn from life or created, and I have a photographic backup. But what's real interesting is, as with, you know, in fresco painting, you will draw and study your objects out many different times before it gets to the actual painting. So you sort of have these images kind of locked in your brain as you get to each one. Being out at the site the other day, you could sort of see all of what's been going on. Today is Korean era attire, and this is the second session on the portrait, even though you saw me blocking, or that was blocked in out at the site. But this, you know, working from life gives you a great sense of, you know, the character, the emotion. There's a great, you know, exchange back and forth between, you know, the model, myself. We have just a good visit on many topics.
About over a year ago, Charles just happened to say, "Would you care to be a model?" And at first I didn't know what to say, but then I thought about it. And were you serious? And yes, he was. So I said, yeah, I'd be happy to do that, and as a tribute to my grandfather, who was a World War I vet, and also my father, a World War II vet. And like I was telling you before, it's also a tribute to my daughter, who worked for 2 years in a homeless day center in Tacoma, Washington. And I didn't really know what that was like, the consequences of being in the service. This is me as the homeless man. That was my first portrait, and finished up the World War I vet as the tribute to my grandfather. This is my bonus. I'm also depicting a Korean veteran. You know, based in Little Falls here, this is a military community, and it's right in central Minnesota, and a lot of people will be able to see it. And the big thing is what Charles said, it's not glorifying war in any manner. This is just a tribute to the people who served, and from over 200 years. I mean, it's just not a quick thing.
I think rather than having this whole big drama of all this movement, it's going to be the portrait and the gestures that some of them will have with their hands that will speak for what we're looking for with each period. And there's just a solemnness that I think is very important also about casting each of these characters. And clearly that's what we're sort of, you know, seeing in this particular era. And then the one in the front of the Vietnam era guy, and there's a kind of an innocence there. I mean, you know, a lot of these people that when they enlist or they're drafted and they first go to war, there's that real, you know, raw innocence that's going to change once they're thrown into the quagmire and the extreme danger and living on the edge that exists within that kind of environment, and they come back very changed people. And so those are some of the things that I'm trying to look for and express. Bob and I, at the very beginning, had done a whole series of different pose ideas just to kind of get some things going for what would be in the different eras and periods, which helped me at least get some base sketches going, so when other people would start to come in, I kind of knew where I might want to go with it. And again, some of that came from the research of looking at you know, the old history books and old photographs and other odds and ends. And then, you know, once people were in, we kind of were able to sort of establish what kind of pose we're going to go for. And then generally each session is a couple hours, and that's pretty much whether a person is standing or sitting. In most cases, everyone's been standing. Is about that's kind of pushing the element. And, you know, we take a break when a break is needed to be taken. Well, I think at this point we will call this one a session and let him take a break because he's been up there for over 2 hours. What we're doing here is going to revisit a portrait sketch that I wanted to add a little more detail to. We've been able to settle on this pose, and so we did a quick sketch early on just to get at it, and then we started that painting that's over there, and we had quite a few sessions on that. And we've got some photographs, so it allows me, once I'm in painting, to have as much information as possible, whether it be, you know, this sketch right here, that painting, series of photos. And I try to gather as much information as possible, so like I say, once I am painting and I don't have immediate access to my model, any questions I may need to come back to, you know, I'll be able to get to right away because of the information I've gathered. Well, I try to make it as relaxing as possible in here because, you know, I mean, I've sat for self-portrait, obviously, I've done a few of those, you just sort of sit in front of a mirror, but I've sat for quite a few portraits for my friend Ben Long that he's either stuck me in oil paintings or in some of the major fresco projects down North Carolina. So it's tedious to sit. It's not easy. So I mean, I know what it's like. You notice you can see through some of these values. Well, this is really a very Italian approach to this type of classical or academic drawing, where you want to use the paper as, you know, part of the drawing as much as you would like let in a canvas, a transparent area and a shadow kind of bleed through. Well, you get a good appreciation for what natural light is all about in this building, and as a painter you want, you know, north light, it's consistent, so I can control at what sort of level I want it dropping in here.
I'm a model for 2 separate figures. This one, of course, is the colonial army officer's uniform. I am a lieutenant colonel, according to the position and the style of the epaulets. The other figure that I'm posing for is the Spanish-American War hero, who is sort of valiantly calling out, "Yes, we're here." 7 generations ago, I think I've got that number right, Colonel Daniel S. Whiting, my direct ancestor, served as ultimately a colonel in the Continental Army. He was at Bunker Hill and Saratoga, to name a couple of famous engagements. I wouldn't say this holds any personal, deep-seated meaning for me. Like I said, I just enjoy Charles and would do anything to help him. I think that this is an incredibly important project simply because it's a source of not only information, but inspiration to anyone who would look at the paintings. All you have to do is examine the various sketches and paintings that Charles does around here to see the power that he can bring to the figures. As far as the Army one has been progressing, it's gotten more powerful every time he touches it. So it lends weight and a certain sense of significance to the efforts of soldiers. The pose that I have in this one is a fairly relaxed pose. I wouldn't say I'm acting at all. I sort of have a smirk on my face when I'm looking at a piece of paper that says, now we have the secret, we'll get them. I'm sure he's visually walked you through how the flow actually goes, kind of a Z sort of thing. The historic significance of the Spanish-American War was that it was when we went from an isolated little nation into an empire. Let's call it what it is. At that point, we became a world presence, and we've been that way ever since. So it's obviously a historical marker of our current status. The pose that I strike is something like this, holding flag and shouting out into the distance, yes, here we are. We're not going away.
Well, since your last visit, you can see that the whole bottom area has been blocked in with colors. So after, as we discussed before, all that other stages, I have broken the painting up into what will be 3 quadrants. One will be the lower half, which is this 4 by 8 foot section that you see going on right here. So I came through and I blocked in all the base color, added in some of my little still life props, and then I've gone back and I've really, since last Monday, been focusing on this particular character right here, which is the Vietnam era veteran, and so I want to have this figure finished. So on the 29th of May, when we have our first public showing of it as a work in progress at the committal hall, this part will be completed, and there'll be other areas that will be kind of filled. And you can really get a sense of the difference in your color density when you start to look at this character. We're here from that stage to this stage. All that's happened in the portraits, for instance, is I've just used white and a color called raw umber to create these atmospheric grays. And then again, where the light is hitting coming in, you can see there's a denser buildup of color. And of course, there'll be a final varnish coat over the whole painting once it's done, so the full luminosity of the paint will come out and really blast right at you. Something else that we should bring up that's not here yet, but Native American involvement with the American military in particular since World War I has been larger than a lot of people might suspect. So also in this area here, well, back behind these nurses will be one of the eagle staffs, like the staff with the eagle feathers. And so that's going to be back up in there. And then there'll be also a tobacco pouch. And the Native American culture is very much into symbolism and the spiritual side of things. And so that's how I felt would be a very good representation here. So, we also have to take into account those other cultures within our own culture today, because we are sort of a melting pot of all, so to speak. Right here now today, I'll sit down, and what I'm working on is his M16, and obviously you can see his portrait back there, which was done from life, and there's also a drawing at the studio done from life. But up until now, a lot of people had trouble sort of envisioning, well, they'd see the sketches, and it's like, well, is that thing going to be in color? And even when the whole thing was still in its predominantly the sepia format, there were still questions of like, well, is it going to be in color? Well, absolutely, So for those that are into the arts as far as understanding painting, this will be a good lesson for students to see how you go about doing a painting, because it's at a lot of different stages right now. It really does entail a lot of research, and for me that's the other part of this project I've enjoyed so much, is the fact that it's kind of like going back to school. We're never too old to learn and dig into something else. And so for me, it's a matter of, well, you're going to end up doing 5 big paintings, but also going to come out with a very thorough knowledge not only of American history, but military history. And anytime you get into any sort of research, especially something that's as extensive as this, you really find out how much you really don't know. Everyone is touched by what is being depicted here, because it's not only about our history, but there's either going to be like a father, grandfather, mother, sister, cousin, friend, whatever, that's been somehow involved with the American military, so it does touch everybody. And here I'm trying to make it as humanly touchable as possible from that standpoint. And that's why I'm, again, working from life with all the models and the different kinds of expressions and things like that. I'm applying the paint in a thinner fashion because of it being in shadow this side. So even though it's like, a black weapon, I do want to have some vibrancy coming out of the colors. So you can see I'm sort of fanning the color in rather than painting and leaving brush strokes. Depending on what you're painting and the effect you're looking for, you've got a very broad movement of your brush and color and direction. I mean, you can force the direction that an eye is going to move by the way you paint something. So you have to, in effect, balance out the attention of all areas. So hopefully that'll kind of help people understand that everyone will eventually be as detailed as this guy right here. Obviously different colors because of different uniforms. And these areas right here represent a very volumetric, what will be a volumetric sense, because our light source is coming from up there down this way. Therefore, with this, this much of his head being under the helmet and all that, that's in shadow. So this is going to be a very atmospheric part of the painting versus here where the light is, so you want that very volumetric. The idea is that as light bounces off this canvas, it bounces back at our eye faster from here than here. And of course, we're all talking about a millionth of a second. Whatever that visually is how we see and perceive depth as we look at things. And so as a painter, with this indirect approach to oil painting, I'm trying to convince you that this is really here on a flat surface, that I'm creating a three-dimensional reality of my vision on this two-dimensional surface for you to appreciate what would be in my mind's eye, so to speak, but adhering to certain laws of painting to achieve that effect.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and be sure to tune in next week for continued coverage of Charles Kapsner. If you have a segment idea for Common Ground pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3022. To view this episode or any Common Ground segment, visit us at lptv.org/Common Ground. Individual segments or copies of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.